Sometimes the place you feel safest can turn into your worst nightmare in an instant. That's what happened to me on a night so unsettling it made me want to pack up and leave the neighborhood I had called home my entire life. Growing up in the same area, you get to know your neighbors well, the people, their routines, the comforting familiarity of it all. I had lived in this neighborhood from elementary school through college. Everything was within walking distance, most people were friendly, and I was close to 3 beautiful parks. Our neighbors, the Smiths, were an elderly couple who kept mostly to themselves. Mr. Smith was quiet, always reading on his porch, while Mrs. Smith seemed to be more eccentric. They lived in a tall 2-story house that overlooked our backyard, making it feel as though they were always nearby, even when you couldn't see them. I'll admit, there were times Mrs. Smith's behavior gave me the creeps. On more than a few occasions, I'd take my dog out late at night and see her standing in her darkened backyard, just staring. She'd be there, motionless, with her gaze fixed on some unseen spot. I'd call out to her, asking if she was all right, but she'd never respond. Sometimes, Mr. Smith would come outside and gently lead her back in, which led me to assume she was suffering from dementia. But every encounter left me feeling a bit uneasy. In 2016, just around the time the first Deadpool movie was released, Mrs. Smith passed away. Not long after, Mr. Smith also passed. Their house sat vacant, eventually going up for sale, but no one bought it. It felt abandoned, eerie, as though something lingered there, something watching. It might have been the recent deaths, but every time I looked at the house, a chill ran down my spine. And then one night, something happened that I still can't wrap my head around. It was around 2 a.m. and I had dozed off watching Adult Swim. My little brother had gone out with friends, and I didn't think much of it until I was woken up by the sound of muffled crying. I sat up, groggy, and went to the bathroom, passing by the living room on my way. There, I saw my little brother sitting on the couch, pale as a ghost, tears streaming down his face. My parents were huddled around him, trying to soothe him, but he looked utterly terrified. They were asking questions like, "What do you mean it talked to you? And are you sure you saw that?" I asked what was going on, but they brushed me off, telling me to go back to bed. Too sleepy to press for answers, I did as they said, but the next morning I was determined to get the full story. My brother stayed home from school the next day, clearly shaken. I caught up with my mom, who told me he had seen something in the Smith's backyard that rattled him so deeply he couldn't stop crying. My dad had even gone outside with a flashlight to check, but there was nothing unusual there. Later that afternoon, I went to my room and found my brother waiting for me. I told him I had seen him crying and asked him what had happened. His eyes were hollow, his face a mask of fear. I'd never seen him like that before. It was as though he'd aged overnight, burdened by something unimaginable. I assured him he didn't have to tell me if he didn't want to, but after a few moments he swallowed and began to talk, his voice barely a whisper. He explained that his friend Andrew had dropped him off late that night, and not wanting to wake our parents, he decided to come in through the side door. As he approached, he glanced up into the Smith's backyard and froze. There, standing in the shadows, was a massive dog with black and orange fur, its form barely visible in the dim light. My brother said he couldn't look away. And then, without moving its mouth, the creature began to speak to him. Its voice echoed in his mind, clear as day, as though it was inside his head. The dog knew his name, his whereabouts, and even what he had been doing that night. But what terrified him the most were its eyes, an unnatural red, fading into an endless black void. He said they looked as though they could swallow his soul. He managed to unlock the door and slip inside, slamming it shut behind him. Standing there, drenched in sweat, he was too petrified to move, his mind reeling. He began to cry uncontrollably, unable to stop the surge of fear that overwhelmed him. That's when my parents found him and the rest of us woke up. I hugged him, trying to console him, but I was just as shaken. He looked so small, so vulnerable. I knew my brother wasn't lying, and that terrified me most of all. The Smiths had never owned a dog, and the only way an animal could have gotten into that backyard was by leaping over the spiked steel gate. After hours of researching online, scrolling through Reddit, YouTube videos, and old forums, I came across a chilling theory. My brother may have encountered a hellhound, a demonic entity often associated with death and lost souls. Hellhounds are said to appear near places of recent death, drawn to those who have yet to cross over. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every shadow seemed longer, every creak in the house more sinister. And the Smiths' home, once just a vacant property, now loomed like a dark presence over our neighborhood, as though something within was waiting. One night, a few weeks later, I heard something outside my window, soft scratching followed by a low guttural growl. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, a stray dog, anything other than what my mind feared. But when I looked outside, my heart nearly stopped. Just beyond our fence in the Smith's backyard stood the same massive figure my brother had described, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. This time it didn't speak, but I felt it watching, its gaze piercing through the glass, heavy with a silent promise. I stumbled back, breath caught in my throat, and before I knew it, it was gone, vanishing as though it had never been there. Now, every time I close my eyes, I see those eyes waiting in the darkness, watching, always watching. Even during the day, I feel its presence lingering as if it's waiting for the right moment. And as much as I want to dismiss it all as a nightmare, I know deep down that it's real. They say the dead don't rest in peace when something holds them back. I only hope whatever waits in the shadows decides to leave us alone. But in my gut, I know this isn't over. That hellhound is still out there, prowling the Smith's yard, waiting, and maybe next time it won't just be watching.